I'd like you to ask to turn with me, if you would, please, to Revelation. And we're going to go to the 3rd chapter of the book of Revelation. And he says in verse 8, I know your works. See, I have set before you an open door. No one can shut it. For you have little strength, have kept my word, and have not denied my name. You see, the Lord knows us. He knows that we have little strength. Verse 10, because you have kept my command to persevere. Big command here. My command to persevere. I also will keep you from the hour of trial, which shall come upon the whole earth, to test those who dwell on the earth. Behold, I'm coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, that no one may take your crown. And then in Mark, the 13th chapter, verse 13, Jesus, in his very own words again, says, you shall be hated by all men for my name's sake. But he who endures to the end, the same shall be saved. 1954 in the Canadian Games, a member of the name of Peters was running the 26-mile marathon. Now, Peters held the world record for the marathon race. That time, it was not a very competitive thing. Today, in Boston Marathon, there may be, if they don't stop it, there'll be 50,000 people running in it. So you have to really limit these marathons now. The New York Marathon, the Boston Marathon, the Detroit Marathon, the Chicago Marathon. And there'll be seconds between the individuals at the end now. You just got to see which Kenyan is going to win the race. But there will always be a very fine line at the end. In those days, it was different. It was not that competitive. There were not that many that entered the race in the Canadian Games. And Peters was out to set a new world's record. He already had the world's record. And he was going, he'd been training hard, and he was ready. When they fired the gun, and they all left that arena, they went out around the course, out around the countryside, and other events continued in the arena, in this great outdoor auditorium sort of thing, or stadium where they were having the event. Peters immediately went to the forefront. He was ahead of everybody else. He was running like a sprinter, and soon had an extremely wide margin. He led the person that was in second place by 15 minutes. Now, in the meantime, there were other events taking place, and you can look these up sometime on the internet if you want to do so, but there was the mile run, and there had never been a sub 4-minute mile. Never in history. In fact, there were individuals, doctors even, who said it could never be done. Physically, man cannot sustain that kind of speed for that long. And so it was surprising that day that 2 men came in under 4 minutes. Dr. Roger Bannister and a man by the name of John Landy. They both came in under 4 minutes. Bannister first, Landy right behind him. It was an amazing day. In fact, when they announced that time, they said 3, and when they said 3, they knew it had come in under 4. The crowd never even heard the number of seconds. They absolutely erupted. And then word came that Peters was about to re-enter the arena and that he was going to go around that track or out around that stadium, and that he would set another world record. And the crowd was absolutely ecstatic. They were standing on their feet. They were yelling. They were cheering. And Peters came in. He started down the sideline, and suddenly he tripped and fell. And the crowd gasped. And for the next 15 minutes, they saw the most horrible thing of this man trying to make it to the finish line. He would get up and he would fall. Nobody could help him. You could shout words of encouragement, but in a race like this, you can't touch them, you can't lift them, you can't help them. And finally, the man that was in second place, a man entered that, his name was Joe McGee. He entered the arena. And that's just before he passed by Jim Peters. Peters turned. He'd gotten up the last time. This time, he headed the wrong direction. And he fell into the infield. And 6 doctors ran to his side, one of which was Dr. Roger Bannister, who had just set the record for the mile. And they worked to save his life. Loaded him into an ambulance, took him to the hospital. He did later recover. He was in the hospital 6 days. He later recovered, but he never raced again. Never recovered to that extent. McGee, who had been so far behind, was crowned the winner. And then the next participant crowned the winner. Because everybody who finishes the race is a winner. But not Jim Peters. He lost the race because he did not finish. He that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. I learned a poem one time, but not long before I came here. It takes a little courage and a little self-control and some grim determination if you want to reach the goal. It takes a deal of striving with a firm and stern-set chin, no matter what the battle. If you really want to win, there's no easy road to glory. There's no rosy road to fame. Life, however you may view it, is no simple parlor game, but its prizes call for fighting, for endurance, and for grit, and a rugged disposition, and a don't know when to quit. You may take a blow or give one. You must risk, and you may lose, and expect it in the struggle that you'll suffer from a bruise. But you mustn't wince or falter if a fight you once began. Be courageous. Face the battle. That is the only way to win. Apostle Paul says it in Galatians, the 6th chapter, verse 9. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Let's not be weary in well-doing. I look at this congregation. When I came here, we had 49 members, I believe it was. The Lord blessed us. We were here less than a year. And when we left, I think it was 93. We didn't baptize all those. We baptized some. But there were people that lived here that went to other churches that we were able to say, come on to church here. For some reason, they went to Hartford or they went somewhere else. And when we they felt like something was really moving, they moved their membership here. I've run into a lot of different people that used to belong to this church. They've moved to other places. Mrs. Battistone, see her out there in Phoenix. But I've also heard of so many that have fallen by the wayside, that have given up. Oh, my friend, don't give up. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. I remember when I was in college at Andrews. You know, I'm a Texan. I'm born down there, grew up down there. And some of my friends went to Andrews the second year. Camille and I got married. Her dad was a pastor at Southern Missionary College. We didn't want to live in their shadow. We didn't want to go to Union College. That's where most of the students ended up going. So some of our friends had gone to Andrews. We went to Andrews. I had no idea it was so cold at Andrews. They call it Berrien Springs. We called it Siberian Springs. Coldest place I've ever been in my life. I mean, that lake effect. they call it, that snow coming off that lake. It was cold. In the springtime, still cold. I would think about how the flowers were blooming in Texas and the birds were singing and the grass was green and there was still snow on the ground in Michigan. Dr. Gilley, our major professor, he knew that. So he used to talk to us about not quitting. Now, as a major professor, I took a number of classes from him. Seemed like in every class he'd tell us the same story about an uncle of his that had diabetes before the days of medication for such a thing. And they could control it only with diet. So they gave him, his doctor prescribed, a small little plate of what he called rabbit food. And that's all he could eat. They put it down at his table, at his place at the table. Everybody else would have mounds of mashed potatoes and good fresh bread and corn and all those things that he couldn't touch. And he would eat his rabbit food. And finally, one day he announced to the table, 20 years he did this faithfully, raised his family. And finally he said, I'm going to eat what I want to, even if it kills me. And he did. And it did. And they buried him. And 2 weeks later, they came on the market with injectable insulin. If he'd have just waited a little longer. We give up. We give up. God says, he that endures unto the end, he that hangs on to Jesus, he that trusts in Jesus, never giving up on him. Give up on yourself. Don't give up on Jesus. Hold on to him and trust in him. You know, some of my most absolutely discouraging experiences came when I was in school. I mean, school can be very discouraging if you're working your way through, and I was. But I remember I was down at Southwestern. We had our first 2 years of college down there. And they had the amateur hour. And so I found out there was some money involved. And if you won your section, you got $25. But if you won the grand prize, you got an additional $100. So I sang, won my section. And I can sing pretty good if there's money out there. And so the grand prize, $100. Sorry, I say 100,000. I dream on, but $100. And I won the grand prize, so I had $125. I want to tell you something. By the way, I'd sing this morning for $125, but somebody says I'll give you $250 not to. But anyway, the amazing thing about it was that when it was all over, I felt so good. I got that money. The assistant treasurer came up to me, and he said, don't you want to put that on your bill? I said, not on your life. That's my money. I'd never had that much money in my life. I put it in my pocket, and I really felt good. That night, it was like, man, I was halfway sleeping between the bed and the sky. It was like I was so excited. Next morning I got up, I was still excited. But as that day went on, that excitement began to subside. And by that night, I was depressed. Monday, horrible day. Tuesday morning, I walked into the the registrar's office, and I said, give me a drop voucher. They gave me a drop voucher. I put all my classes down. They said, wait a minute, if you're dropping more than 2, you've got to see the president. I said, let me see him. So they ushered me in. His name was Lawrence Scales. Wonderful man. He was a young man as a president. He was president there for 4 years, went on to PUC to be pastor for a short time, died with cancer out there at the age of 43. So you know that he was a pretty young man when he was president of the college. He looked at me and said, what's the problem? I said, I'm sick of this place. I'm sick of all the restrictions. Oh, he said, you've always gotten by before. You know, there were a lot of restrictions in those days. I mean, let's face it, folks. Now, nothing like our schools are today. I mean, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't even talk to a girl on the Sabbath. I mean, you know, you couldn't look at them. You couldn't walk the same direction on the Sabbath that they did. I said, and by the way, I can remember, it can be tragic with some of these kids. I remember one guy, he said, I'm getting out of here. I can't stand it. I'm sick and tired of everybody telling me what to do. I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to join the Marines. And he really had reasoned that out, hadn't he? So I told Elder Scales, I said, I'm tired of that. He said, you get by all right. I said, I'm sick of the food. He said, you don't eat around here half the time anyway. I hear about you going into town to eat. I said, I'm sick of all of the rules of the dorm and everything else. He said, he looked at me, and I said, I'm not doing too good with my grades. He said, your grades never have been very good. Finally, he looked at me and he says, is it because you've broken up with your girlfriend? I said, how do you know? He said, everybody knows. Boy, I knew then for sure I was getting out of there. This girl and I had signed up for every class together. She was taking pre-nursing. I was taking pre-nursing classes. I never was going to be a nurse or a doctor or anything else medical. I was taking those classes just so I'd be close to this girl. And you know, when you sign up in a class, the first day you go, you sit down, and then they make the chart. And they say, now sit there the rest of the time. We were sitting next to each other in each class. We were lab partners in the biology class. And I said, Elder Skills, I can't stand to even see this girl. I get sick. I can't eat. By the way, in those days, I was as tall as I am now. I weighed nearly 100 pounds less than I do now. And in the next couple of weeks there, I lost 15 pounds that I couldn't have afforded. I weighed only 150 pounds then. So I was going down to 135 pounds. And I will tell you that I was miserable. I said, Elder, I can't, I want to drop. He said, I'm going to leave this drop voucher right here. He said, you go over to the dorm, you pack a bag. You go anywhere you want to go. I'm not going to ask you where you go. Don't take all your stuff. Just pack a little bag. Get out of here. You come back here next Monday morning. If you still want me to sign this drop voucher, I will. But I want you to think about this. I went over, packed a little bag. I wasn't going to go home because my mother liked that girl. She'd take one look at me and she'd say, what'd you do? Make her mad. What'd you do? I'd get all the blame. I knew that. I had a brother, 16 years older, that lived down in Tyler, Texas, down in East Texas. So I started hitchhiking down to see my brother. Along the way, I kind of got a little hungry. Thought maybe I can eat. Went in a little old, kind of a diner kind of place. There was this old waitress, just typical type waitress, you know. And she's walking up and down, chewing gum, and so forth. And she looked at me. I ordered the plate lunch, and I couldn't. Then I must have thought of the girl because I couldn't eat. And she came by, and she looked at me, and she said, you'll get over her. I said, what? She said, you've broken up with your girlfriend. I said, how'd you know? I thought maybe people calling ahead, you know. She said, it's written all over your face. Oh, man, I got out of there. Went on down to my brother. Next few days, played a little golf with him. He was a great golfer. I mostly just carried his bag. I read a little scripture, read a little philosophy, talked with my brother and with some old friends. My strength began to renew. Now, by the way, let me tell you something. You got to be careful. You know, they call it puppy love, but it's real to the puppy. I've had 3 suicides that as a pastor, I've conducted. And all 3 of them involved, 2 of them involved girls. If they'd have just held on. Third one was over grades, which was ridiculous. But both, none. When kids at a certain age, when they're upset, stay close to them. I remember one teenager had a really rough time with a breakup. We put him on a suicide watch with his friends and everybody. We watched that kid, and we got him through it. I saw him a number of years ago, and I said, "You remember when you broke up with and I named that girl?" He said, "No, I don't even remember that." And he he said, "Oh, that didn't bother me." He had forgotten. You see, things can heal, but people make decisions when they're upset, and they shouldn't. They shouldn't. I had 2 friends quit school, joined, well, they were drafted, because in those days you quit, you were drafted, went off to Vietnam. Both of them, their names are on the wall down there in Washington. I was right at that age. A decision at that point could have been a really bad decision. Monday morning, I walked back in to that office, and I told the president, I said, "Tear up that drop voucher." I said, "If anybody's going to leave this campus, she's going to leave this campus." Now, you recognize that was a defense mechanism, but I set out to be just as mean to her as I possibly could. I had to do that. I could not soften. You understand that, don't you? That's a defense thing. I didn't say anything to her. I ignored her. If she had asked me what time it was, I didn't have a watch, but if I'd have known what time it was, I wouldn't have told her. I would not speak to her. Now, that girl meant a lot to me. I knew that I loved that girl. And about a year later, we got back together, and we've been together ever since. Now, don't you blame her for putting me through all that stuff now, because it was my fault. I was too possessive, and I was too demanding, and I was too much, period. That's all there was to it. But I thank God for that woman. And for over 50 years, she didn't like for me to tell people that. She said, they can figure out how old we were. We were only 3 years old when we got married. So, but we just thank God that He brought us together. Rash decisions, they can cost you. He that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. Years later, out there in Michigan, it was cold again, but Greek class was horrible. Now listen, I was running a business, going to school, making more money than my professors were at that time, because teachers and preachers didn't make much money. When I took a pay cut when I came here as a pastor, from being a student, I made a lot more money as a student, lived better than I did as a pastor in those days. Had a little business, that business still operating today in Berrien Springs, an advertising specialty and promotional business, and I sold all kind of things all over the place and did good with it. And but I didn't have time to study like a lot of people did. I made a decent grade in all my classes except Greek. I had a struggle with Greek, a real struggle with Greek. My kids, they're all college graduates. One of them has a master's. The others have been very successful in school and teach school. 3 of them are school teachers, though 2 of them are stay-at-home moms and running their own schools at home now, but the other teaches out at PUC Prep. The older son is administrator down in Florida of a convalescent hospital. But they tell me, they say, Dad, don't tell this story. I said, don't tell this story. People will think that stupidity is hereditary. They'll think we've got it too. But I was struggling with Greek. Now, I wasn't the only one. I just don't pull down all the others with me. But it looked like some of us wouldn't pass it. We had to have it to graduate, go into the ministry. Had to have it. Didn't have to make much of a grade in it, but you had to pass it. So we were really having a hard time. We had a first-year Greek teacher. First year he had taught it. He was being awfully hard. And nearly everybody in the class was struggling. Finally, one day he came in and he said, last night I was driving along the Ohio Turnpike, heard a preacher preaching on the radio. And he said, keep on keeping on. He said, that's the motto for this class. Well, we wrote it down in the Greek book. Keep on keeping on. Every day at class we'd come in, because we met 5 days a week. We'd come in, write that on the board. Keep on keeping on. And we would chant that, keep on keeping on. We didn't want him to forget it. And we kept coming to class, kept trying. Kept having a really rough time. 3 over 10, 4 over 11, bad quizzes. Finally, it came time to get the grades. I hadn't even paid my class dues yet because I wasn't sure that I wanted to pay $75 class dues unless I knew I was going to graduate. So I'm standing in line to get my grades. There's a fellow in front of me, big, tall fellow, a lot of black hair, and he's rubbing his hands like this. And I said, what's wrong, Bob? Bob Falkenberg, you may have heard of him. I said, what's wrong, Bob? By the way, well, I'll tell you that in a minute, but Bob looked at me and he said, Gilley, from the first grade until this, my final report card, I've made straight A's. I said, well, but he said, I may have slipped to a B in one class. Oh, I said, Bob, you do have a problem. That is really a problem. May have slipped to a B. And I was kind of mocking him a little bit. Bob got up there. He got his grades. He jumped up. He nearly hit the ceiling, and he yelled, Gilley, straight A! Straight A! Down the hall he went. Bob hit some real rough roads later on in life. And I want to tell you this. He didn't quit. He could have. He could have quit in embarrassment. He could have quit in anger. He could have felt like some folks pulled the rug out from under him. A lot of different things. I've seen held elders quit the church because they weren't reelected. But Bob, and by the way, Bob, any general conference president has the right to have an office in the general conference and to be there the rest of his life. You don't realize that, but it's true. They've got that right. Bob didn't exercise that right when he left office. But he continued with soul winning, and the Lord's used him to baptize more souls than any human being in the history of our work. It runs into the millions. He won't let me tell you how many, but it does. God's really used him because he didn't quit. Straight A, he said down the hall. Then it was my turn. And I stepped up there. I was only looking for one. My grades in the other classes were all right. They were okay. But I knew that one was going to be a problem. And I came down to that one. And there it was. And I jumped up and I nearly hit the ceiling. And I yelled out at the top of my voice, whoopee, a D! And down the hall I went. Keep on keeping on. Keep on keeping on. The difference between Peter and Judas is that Peter did not give up. He got back up. He denied the Lord every bit as much as Judas. Judas gave up. Not just on himself, he gave up on the Lord. Peter did not. He came back. We look at Jacob. Jacob was a man who was dishonest. Moses, it said, thou shalt not kill on those commandments. he was given the commandments, one of which he had broken. Thou shalt not kill. David, an adulterer and a murderer. These are men God still used. No matter what you've done, no matter how you've disappointed him, God says, hang on to me. Believe in me. Trust in me. And lift up others. No man is an island. No man stands alone. Each man's joy is joy to me. Each man's grief is my own. We need one another. And so I will defend each man as my brother. Each man as my friend. Apostle Paul says, brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. You know, this afternoon I'll tell you a few more things, but I got so very discouraged when I was here, just beginning my ministry. I was ready to give up. I was ready to give up. A number of reasons. One of which was that we just didn't have even enough money, it seemed, to get by at all. And secondly, that no matter how hard we worked, it seemed like all you got from some church members was criticism. And let me tell you, that's hard on a pastor. This afternoon I'll tell you about a letter I got while I was here. I'll tell you about that letter, how God protected me from reading that letter until the right time. But you know something? That night, I was so discouraged. I lay down over there on Warner Road on the floor, turned on the radio, and I listened for Elder Richards. I couldn't find him. I listened for anybody I'd ever listened to before. It was a Sunday night. I couldn't find anybody I'd ever heard before. And finally, I heard some old preacher preaching out of Wheeling, West Virginia. At the close of the message, he said, now, until next week, I want to say to you what I say every week, and that is keep on keeping on. I came up off that floor and I ran to my bookshelf because I wasn't even sure that was the exact motto that Ivan Blazin had told us about. And there it was. I'd found that same preacher that he had found when he was driving along the Ohio Turnpike. The same message. Keep on, keeping on with Jesus. My friend, hold on to him. Don't give up. Don't give up. And he will see you through. God bless you.